What is going on, everybody? Welcome to a deep dive into the number 23 team in my 2019 NFL Power Rankings, the Denver Broncos. And this Broncos team is going to be fun to talk about because it's kind of the more things change, the more things stay the same. This team had a ton of turnover this offseason, a new coach, new quarterback, a lot of roster turnover, but at the same time, they're really going to try and win the same way they've been trying to since they won that Super Bowl. They're trying to capitalize on this window with these defensive stars, Von Miller, Chris Harris. They're going to try to win by playing defense and playing ball control offense. It's not an easy way to win a Super Bowl, but it's also worked for several teams in the past. So that is going to be their trajectory. It's going to be a fun team to talk about. So please, guys, hit that like button if you enjoy the video. If you learn something, it's the easiest way to share the video and support my channel. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any deep dives in the future as we go through the rest of these teams. And if you're new to the series, what we do here is we do a little intro, then we go through the roster. We rank each position, how they stack up against the rest of the league. While we do that, you're going to be looking at my own custom Madden roster. So while it is a video game, they are my own ratings, and they accurately show how I perceive each player. It's a nice little graphic to use. And then after that, we go through the schedule. We talk Vegas over under and my win total expectations for this team. And that's all we got. I also just need to throw in real quick, I do have a realistic rebuild series of this Denver Broncos team. If you're new to the channel here, checking out what I have to say about the Broncos, you might enjoy that Madden 19 rebuild of this team. So definitely go check that out. I'll drop a link here in the description. So let's get into it here with the Denver Broncos. Like we said, it's got a lot of turnover, a lot of things that we're going to have to talk about here, but they're bringing in a new coach here, Vic Fangio. They have two new quarterbacks in the building with Joe Flacco, former Super Bowl champion who did it with a great defense like they have here in Denver. This is a team that I was about as high on last year. I will say that I think this roster and the coaching is going to be better this year than it was last year. And Denver's definitely in this tier here of teams that I might not necessarily predict to be, a top 12 playoff team by the end of the year. But if they made it, it certainly would not surprise me. And this 23rd ranking is pretty consistent actually with where I've been seeing them around there with like ESPN and NFL Network. So let's just get into the roster because I think as far as an intro is concerned, we kind of know what to expect from this Denver team and what a good season is going to look like for this team. So starting with the quarterback position, Joe Flacco, Drew Lock, they're going to rank tied for 28th. And the first thing I will say is when this team acquired Joe Flacco, it was, tasteless, not distasteful, but it was just kind of right? Like, okay, that's their starter next year, that's fine. But then you go and see what the Jags gave Nick Foles, and frankly, I think, neither of them are outstanding quarterbacks, but Flacco, I think, is a better quarterback than Nick Foles, and he came at a much cheaper cost than Nick Foles. So in hindsight now, I do think they played this quarterback position about as well as they could this offseason. And then we'll talk about what they did with Drew Lock in just a second, which was a good move as well. But as far as Flacco is concerned, he's fine. He's got a good downfield arm. I'd like to see him throw the short game with a little more zip on his ball because he does have the arm talent. But a lot of times when he's throwing quick outs and stuff, it just doesn't come with a lot of authority, a whole lot of confidence. His accuracy lacks a lot to be desired. His processor, he doesn't make a ton of bad mistakes, but he will miss reads as well. So he's fine. He's won a Super Bowl in the past with an elite defense. He's going to bring a certain aroma, just like we talked about with what the Jags were looking for. You look that way and you see a quarterback that has won a Super Bowl before, you get a little extra confidence knowing that, hey, this guy's done it before. It's possible with this quarterback. So you get that with Joe Flacco, but on the field, he's just not very special. And I don't think anyone's really arguing for Joe Flacco at this point. Is it an upgrade from what you had last year? It very well might be. They're just different styles between Flacco and Case Keenum. Keenum lacks that arm talent. You kind of have a limited playbook with Case Keenum that you don't necessarily have with Flacco. But when, the play breaks down, I'd rather have Case Keenum than Joe Flacco just because Joe Flacco is that classic trebuchet quarterback where, he's got a big arm, but it's not necessarily accurate like a trebuchet, and God knows you can't move that thing around. So, that's Joe Flacco. This season is not going to be made or broken on the heels of Joe Flacco. He's going to take a game-managing role here. And then you also have to talk about Drew Lock, who I think is going to compete here. We saw Joe Flacco lose his starting job to Lamar Jackson last year. It very well could happen here again in Denver with Drew Lock. And I applaud this team for what they did with Lock, because this team has really been swinging big for quarterbacks, especially you look at like Paxton Lynch, but Brock Osweiler, they thought they had something in him, a second-round pick. They really have not been able to figure out the quarterback situation after Peyton Manning. And a big part of that, is obviously poor drafting. Those players were not good NFL quarterbacks, but this team has not had a good offensive line. The run game's been very inconsistent. They really haven't had a good running back situation at all. The wide receiver situation here has been fine, but not great. They've had a lot of injuries. They just haven't had a great surrounding core for a young quarterback to develop. So I love the fact that they said, we like Drew Lock. He's got a really high upside, but if he comes in here with a bad offensive line, without really good receivers, he's probably not going to work out, because he's a late first, early second round prospect. So they decided to trade down, collect an extra second round pick and a third round pick, get a really nice quick hitting option in Noah Fant, who's really going to open up this offense both in the short game and as a vertical threat. That was an excellent pick, excellent value at 20, and it gave this team a big-time athlete and a big-time playmaker as a receiver. And we'll talk about Fant and this receiving core in just a second. But then they also got an extra second-round pick that they were able to bring in Dalton Risner, a really good guard. So they beef up the offensive line and give a receiving threat while also getting a quarterback in the second round in Drew Lock that many people thought could have been their pick at number 10. And I'm sure they thought long and hard about it and would have been pretty bummed if they weren't able to get him in the second round. But it all played out into their favor, and I will applaud John Elway for finally, in my opinion, managing the quarterback situation correctly for an off season. We'll see if it all plays out. Drew Lock is a very hit or miss prospect. He's that typical, lacks the production, maybe not the most accurate or best processor, but has all of the tools you look for. And he's in a good situation here where he can come in and sit and learn from Joe Flacco for whatever that's worth, but more so just, get familiar with the scheme, with these receivers, get up to speed with the NFL, and not be forced into action too early. So I'm not going to sit here in June of 2019 and predict if Drew Lock is going to be a good quarterback or not. All I will say is that he has the upside, and they've done an excellent job making it as good of a scenario for him to become a franchise quarterback, which he does have the upside to be. But I'm also not going to lie that there are parts of his tape that will tell you, he's got the tendencies of something like a Blake Bortles or, I don't know, Jake Locker, the quarterback that just doesn't have the processor and accuracy to succeed. So we'll see how it all plays out. But you got to credit them for not, putting themselves out of the running of still going for some of these better quarterbacks in these upcoming draft classes, because they haven't invested so much that they won't be able to back out of it. But also give them credit for bringing in two, interesting quarterbacks here that could help this team win for cheap costs, which is the opposite of what some teams we've talked about, like the Giants and Jags, have done, which is just overpaying and overdrafting quarterbacks of similar caliber to Joe Flacco and Drew Lock, who I did, by the way, have a higher grade on Drew Lock than Daniel Jones, who went 6th overall to the Giants. And then Broncos fans are going to yell at me if I don't mention Brett Ripien. I don't think he meets the arm strength threshold. An undrafted rookie free agent reminds me a little bit of Luke Falk from last year. He's a good, smart player, looked good in college at Boise State. Maybe he'll pull a Kellen Moore and he'll be coaching, be an offensive coordinator in the NFL in about 10 years, because he is a smart player. But I don't know. He might make the team as the third quarterback, but I'm not going to spend much more time talking about Brett Ripien. And then you also have Kevin Hogan here. So that's the quarterback situation. Now let's move on and talk about the running backs here. So you got Philip Lindsay and Royce Freeman here, a really nice young 1-2 punch, and we'll have to see if they can continue to grow as young players. It kind of sucks for me to be sitting here, and a lot of people are going to tell me I'm too low on Philip Lindsay after he has an excellent season, makes the Pro Bowl, looking back on my deep dive last year, I brought up Phillip Lindsay when most people outside of Denver wouldn't have even known who he was. I said that he has a good chance of making the team, and he reminds me a lot of Dion Lewis and could be one of the best undrafted free agent pickups. Sure enough, he has a great year, and now I'm sitting here low on Phillip Lindsay. I think he's a great player. I see him down the road. I don't see him as a 3-down back. He had some very big explosive runs. He's going to be able to continue that, but maybe a little more variance from year to year on that. Hard to project that. Smaller guy. I don't see him as a full feature back. Now, I think he's an excellent weapon, something along the lines of like Tariq Cohen. Slightly different player, but the same kind of conversation. A guy that makes a great impact in the receiving game, can have some explosive runs, but I do think Royce Freeman's going to be pretty heavily involved yet again, and I would be very, very surprised if Phillip Lindsay repeated his production and Pro Bowl season, but I do think he'll have a very positive impact on this team in the ways we just mentioned. And then Royce Freeman, he is someone that does intrigue me. I was lower on him in the draft, and I still might be low on him. I am just totally kind of waiting to see what his second year looks like, because he had some really nice runs. I actually tweeted out a highlight of him. He looked Le'Veon Bell-esque with really nice patience, shiftiness, and power. It just didn't happen consistently enough. And my criticism of him in the draft was that he just doesn't have the explosiveness on film. He's a good athlete, like a workout warrior type, but he just doesn't necessarily see holes and hit them very hard. And if you're not elite vision Le'Veon Bell, that style doesn't always work, if you're not creating yardage with physical ability. So we'll see. He kind of has to figure out his running style, I think. But he is slowly growing on me, and I think he will have a better second season here. And then you've also got Devontae Booker here. Guess you got to mention him. I'll stand by what I said last year. He's a bigger Christine Michael, a full speed ahead, lacks vision, okay running back to have as your third guy. And then they pick up Khalfani Mohammed to compete as a third down back here. You also have a good fullback in Andy Janovich. The offensive coordinator coming over here, Rick Scangarillo, might try to replicate some of the things this team did with, heavy packages in San Francisco under Kyle Shanahan with fullbacks. Something we saw a lot of in San Francisco last year. The Broncos have a lot of tight ends and a good fullback here, so we might see a lot of that this year. But at the end of the day, it's a good 1-2 punch. They're going to come in tied for 22nd, which I think is perfectly reasonable. Denver's kind of doing it the right way here. You can have success with the running back position. You can have Pro Bowlers as undrafted free agents without having to spend a bunch of money on the position. So you got to respect them for that. Then at wide receiver, tight end here, they come in tied for 17th. And a lot of this is going to hinge on how Emmanuel Sanders looks. He had a very stunning season last year at 31 years old, but yet again gets injured, which has kind of plagued the second half of his career. And I would actually project that he's unlikely to both be as effective as he was last year and stay healthy. And I think Denver is probably prepared for that, but whatever they can get from him will be great. I expect you get somewhere between 10 and 14 games of him as a solid number 2 wide receiver here. I'd be pretty stunned if he was back to as good as he was last year. Could prove me wrong, but at 32 years old, that does seem a little unlikely, coming off a significant injury there, tearing his Achilles, which is one of the worst injuries you can have, especially on a player that relies a lot on quickness. But Emmanuel Sanders at his size remains probably one of the best catch in traffic wide receivers. Not necessarily, making catches like over people, but he is absolutely incredible at like arm fighting through, guys trying to like swat at his arms, maybe like arguably pass interference. He's as good as anyone at catching the ball, taking a hit, and not dropping the ball. I think that's probably his best trait outside of maybe his route running. So after Sanders, you have Courtland Sutton, who was my number 1 wide receiver in last year's draft. I expect with a more vertical-looking offense here, Courtland Sutton to emerge as the number 1 target here. Actually a pretty similar player to like Corey Davis in Tennessee, just a big physical freak. He had his moments last year, and I think he's going to take a step up in his second year, potentially emerge as a low-end number 1 wide receiver in a best dream case scenario. You got Deshaun Hamilton as well, a 4th round pick last year who I liked, thought that was a great pick last year. He's fairly similar to Emmanuel Sanders. He's going to have a good mentor there. I think they see him as the long-term replacement, at least as the slot receiver here. But then after those 3, you got a major drop-off at wide receiver. You're looking at River Crawcraft, Tim Patrick, Aaron Burbridge, Juwan Winfrey, a 6th round pick this year, Bug Howard. You also have Brendan Langley switching to wide receiver here, a 3rd round pick as a cornerback. Never really worked out as a corner. I'm not even going to begin to guess how good he's going to be as a wide receiver. I feel like it's probably not going to work out, but he's a good athlete. Maybe he emerges and makes this team as a wide receiver. If and when something happens to Emmanuel Sanders, this team is going to probably struggle at the wide receiver position. But having poor wide receivers is nothing Joe Flacco is unfamiliar with. He is going to have a bunch of tight ends here. I actually thought this was a good tight end room before the Noah Fant pick. So Noah Fant is going to come in here, probably be the number 1 tight end. He's going to be a bit of a slot receiver, flexed out Y, if you will, but elite physical specimen, good hands, good route runner. Gonna have to learn how to block a little better if he's gonna play as an inline tight end, but a pretty similar prospect, I would say, to Evan Ingram. A little bigger, slightly faster, but he's gonna have a similar impact on this offense as Ingram has had on the Giants. Is a really good player, just not much of a blocker. And then you got Jeff Hireman, solid, versatile tight end, could do a lot worse as a number 2. And then Troy Fumagalli, Jake Butt, 2 good Big Ten tight ends. Okay blockers, okay athletes, okay receivers, really good tight end, 2, 3, 4s. Would not be that surprised if we saw one of those 3 guys we just mentioned get traded, because I think all 4 of these guys are potential starting tight ends in the NFL. It's not like there's a ton of them to go around. So if a team like New England, who just cut Austin Seferian-Jenkins and has been trying to find a tight end, called Denver and inquired about Hireman or Troy Fumagalli or Jake Butt, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a move like that before the season. I think that'd be a good move for Denver to pick up a 3rd or 4th round pick for one of those guys if they could get that. So you could do a lot worse. They're going to come in tied for 17th. That could go up or down depending on what Emmanuel Sanders looks like this year. It's a little hard to project because he is their best receiver. But even if he didn't play a snap this year, Noah Fant, Cortland Sutton, these tight ends, Deshaun Hamilton, you include Phillip Lindsay as a good receiving back, like they've got some good weapons to move around here and execute their offense. Now, a lot of this success of this offense is going to come down to what this offensive line can look like, which is, I would argue, upgraded from last year. They did lose Paradise, their center, who's one of the best centers in the NFL. Center, a little more of a replaceable position, but they paid big money for Jawan James here at right tackle. And then they drafted Dalton Reisner in the 2nd round, who a lot of people wanted their teams to take in the 1st round. So you upgrade the right side of the line significantly. The left side of the line is still pretty solid too. You got Garrett Bowles, who's a fine left tackle. He's still learning. He's an older prospect, drafted 2 years ago, but starting caliber nonetheless. And then Ronald Leary, a veteran. He's regressing, but still can play. The big question here is going to be, how does Connor McGovern, a 5th round pick in 2016, fare at center? Or does Sam Jones, a 6th round pick last year, end up winning that job? We've seen 5th, 6th, 7th round undrafted centers like these guys emerge as quality starters all the time. Can Denver get that out of him with good surrounding talent on this offensive line? Now, they do lack any kind of dominant players on this offensive line. Everyone's just kind of starting caliber-ish. Maybe a little more, a little less. And then Connor McGovern, you've got big questions there at center. The depth, nobody has offensive line depth. So, it's just a bunch of names. Not really anyone worth mentioning. They did sign Chaz Green from Oakland, the laughingstock from the Cowboys, who gave up 6 sacks to Adrian Claiborne. Does he make this team? That could be a bad indicator of this offensive line. But they're going to come in tied for 23rd regardless. It's going to be one of those offensive lines that allows you to do what you want to do. It's not going to necessarily help you do what you want to do, but it's probably not going to hold this team back too much. But I will say, if you want Joe Flacco without any kind of elite deep threat to become anything close to a top 25 quarterback and have a serviceable offense, you're going to want to have 5-6 second protection, the equivalent of what Tom Brady has in New England. or Drew Brees for the Saints. Like, those guys get so much time to throw because of how good their offensive lines are. You're not getting that here in Denver. It's a good unit. It's not going to get in your way, but they're not really dominating anyone up front. So with that said, the offense as a whole is going to come in pretty low for me. The ceiling just isn't there. I think they've upgraded the floor, but I just don't see a very high ceiling here unless any kind of crazy, like, Drew Lock comes in and is the next Patrick Mahomes type of deal, which seems pretty unlikely. But they're going to come in 29th for offense. You also just have problems with the coach and culture here, which is going to take that down. Rick Scangarillo, first-time play caller here. They're trying to implement the Kyle Shanahan system here. We just don't know anything about Rick Scangarillo. Maybe he's the next Sean McVay. Seems pretty unlikely. But you also just don't have any kind of like carryover culturally in terms of this offense next year because you had so much turnover on that offensive line with the quarterback, new offensive coordinator. It's just a lot of things that this team's going to be trying to figure out as the season goes on. Let's flip over and talk about the better side of the ball for this team, the defense, which does come in tied for 8th in the NFL. So like we said, this defense is going to have to get back to that elite top 5 defense, I think, if they want to be not just playoff contenders, because I do consider them a playoff contender, but a Super Bowl contender like they were years ago. So let's go through the roster. The run defense, it's fine. They're going to come in 19th. You got Shelby Harris who really dominated against the run last year. It's a lot of no names kind of in a way, unless you're a Broncos fan, I guess. But this is another team that kind of embodies why you don't necessarily spend a lot of money on interior defensive line, a lot of high draft capital on interior defensive line, if you're not getting an Aaron Donald, a Geno Atkins, Fletcher Cox type. You're better off just getting, cheap free agents, 3rd, 4th round picks that can play the run, maybe get 40 pressures a year, because the gap between the 8th best interior defensive lineman and Shelby Harris, who's, I don't know, what would you say, the 30th to 40th to 50th, somewhere in that range, it's very, very marginal. So I like what Denver's got going on here. Shelby Harris was great last year. You still have Derek Wolfe up front. He's their best pass rushing interior guy, but he can play the run well as well. Adam Gotsis, kind of a freak. He can play the run well. Zach Kerr, he played very well. He's a good run defender. You've also got Billy Wynn here as a rotational competitor to make this roster. And then the wild card here is going to be Draymond Jones, who I gave an A to the Broncos for this pick. Really intriguing raw prospect. I don't know how much of an impact he's going to make as a rookie. Again, a wild card. He could just come in and be a dominant defensive end in this scheme. He, to me, showed some flashes of something like a Cam Jordan. He is a bit of a flex athlete. Maybe he gains weight and becomes more of a traditional 3-4 end, like a 3 technique. I thought he could have played a 4-3 defensive end position as well. This team's pretty good on edge rushers, so they're going to keep him as a interior guy, but the question becomes, is he good against the run? Is he a 3rd down pass rusher, which I think is more likely in his rookie year? He has an insane first step, a really high upside. He's going to come in here and learn from Vic Fangio, one of the best front 7 coaches in the NFL right now. So I really like the future outlook here of Draymond Jones. I don't know how much of an impact he's going to make as a rookie. A good comparison for him right now, I think, at least in terms of his scenario, is a player for Chicago last year, Bilal Nichols, who was a 5th round pick, an absolute freak, but would have been considered raw, hence why he fell. He really came on late as a good pass rusher for the Bears, next to a couple of really good run defenders in Hicks and Eddie Goldman. So I think that Fangio's going to see a lot of similarities there with Draymond Jones. He's even more explosive than Bilal Nichols, though he is a little lighter. So do keep an eye on Draymond Jones, maybe later in the year or as we head into next year as a potential breakout star player. So the run defense will be solid here. Really don't need to spend much more time talking about it, as we just don't put much emphasis on run defense because of a high weekly variance. So then we got the pass rush here, which is big time and is going to be this team's path to playoff success here. Ranking 2nd in the NFL, Von Miller, probably, the 3rd best pass rusher in the NFL, the 2nd best edge guy behind Khalil Mack. You got Aaron Donald, but Von Miller still absolutely elite here. And then you got a, rising star on the other side in Bradley Chubb. high sack totals as a rookie, was one of the more polished edge rushers coming out in recent memory. I still think he's a bit of an awkward scheme fit as a 3-4 outside linebacker, but he found a way to make it work. I would like to see this team scheme ways up for him to put his hand in the dirt a little more. Khalil Mack did that a little bit for Chicago last year. Had his hand in the dirt about 225 out of 819 snaps last year. So I will say that Vic Fangio probably a little smarter than Vance Joseph in terms of how to create mismatches. I think that as far as the sack total is concerned, it's going to be a little difficult for him to repeat that. He had some pretty good cleanup sacks and stuff, but he had a very good season. But as far as like his pressure numbers, his impact on this defense, I think that Bradley Chubb's going to take a step up this year, in large part thanks to Vic Fangio coaching him up a little bit better, and perhaps we see him put his hand in the dirt as a more traditional Leo or Rio, where he can utilize that power like he did at NC State a little bit better. You know, you can use power as an outside linebacker like Khalil Mack, but I do think you have to have a certain explosiveness to drive into guys to do it without your hand in the dirt. I don't know if Chubb has that, so I think you guys get the point there about Bradley Chubb and Von Miller. Excellent duo. As far as the depth is concerned, you do leave a little bit to be desired with a couple guys leaving here. Namely, Shaquille Barrett is gone, so that third rotational guy, that role is up for grabs at the moment. They also lost Shane Ray, whatever. But you're going to have Jeff Holland, an undrafted pickup last year out of Auburn. He can play a little bit. He'll compete to make this team. You have DeMarcus Walker, a second-round pick in 2017. He's probably looking like that number 3 edge guy here. You have Justin Hollins, a 5th-round pick. Rumors are that he's going to play middle linebacker. I don't know. I get it. He's long, fast, and quick. That's a complete position change for a 23-year-old 5th-round pick. I would just keep him as a 3-4 outside linebacker. Certainly utilize his coverage abilities from that position. Maybe on like first downs, you want to give Von Miller a break. He can drop into coverage from that spot. I don't necessarily love him as a full-time inside linebacker. I think you'll also see him schemed up on, like those. You're technically a middle linebacker, but you're just a blitzer in the A-gap. I think Justin Hollins does a lot of that as well. Then you've got Aaron Wallace competing for a job there, and that's about it. So the depth is just kind of what it is. But Miller and Chubb, great pass rushing duo. And then you're getting some pass rush on the interior. Again, Draymond Jones, a bit of a wild card there. Maybe DeMarcus Walker rotates as a 3 technique on third down as well. He certainly did last year. Derek Wolfe can rush the passer. You could do worse on an interior rush, but it's not like you've got any kind of primo interior rusher there. So then we got to talk about the linebackers. They're going to rank tied for 25th. Brandon Marshall heading out. He's been a mainstay for this defense, so there's going to be a bit of a transition now over to Todd Davis, who was fine last year. He's a low-end starter, middle linebacker. Then you got Josie Jewell. He's going to be technically a starter here. Personally, I think he comes off the field a lot in nickel packages. You've got Sua Cravens on this team. A lot of secondary options to rotate in there as nickel linebackers. Jewell's a good, smart player and a good run defender, but he lacks those physical tools to be a good coverage guy, especially if he gets matched up on some of these faster running backs or tight ends. He's just going to get outmatched. So I think we see him come off the field a good bit on third downs. And the depth just not very good. Keyshawn Vieira was not a fan of him as a 6th-round pick last year. Dakota Watson, Joseph Jones. It's really not good depth and not a strength of this defense at the middle linebacker position. And at the end of the day, this defense, when it was elite, yes, they had an elite edge rushing duo, and yes, they had a great secondary, but they also had Brandon Marshall in his prime and Danny Trevathan in his prime covering the middle of the field, which really helped this defense elevate to that elite level. And I think that's the biggest difference here, and why they're ultimately going to come in just inside the top 10 as opposed to a top 5 defense, despite having some truly elite talent. I do think that is a hole there at the middle linebacker position that I believe is actually undervalued in the modern game with how these offenses are operating these days with these quick-hitting passing games. So let's move on and talk about the secondary here, which is going to be pretty good, tied for 15th. So you love Chris Harris, best nickel corner in the NFL. He can even step outside. Still a top 5 corner in the NFL. I would rank him 5th. You love that. You love paying him, keeping him happy, saying, hey, Chris, I know you're unhappy. We think we have a great defense here with you on the field. Let's get you your money this year. And please just be that great player that we need here. So that's going to boost this thing up. Chris Harris is phenomenal and perfect modern defensive back who can neutralize a lot of these crossing patterns, screen routes. He's so good against the run and the screen game. Just love what Chris Harris brings to the table. And then they did upgrade at corner other than Chris Harris. So you've got Bryce Callahan and Kareem Jackson coming in. And this is intriguing because Chris Harris, Bryce Callahan, and Kareem Jackson are all, in an ideal situation, a nickel cornerback. So what do they do here? I would not take Chris Harris out of the nickel myself. So where does that leave you with Bryce Callahan and Kareem Jackson, who you paid a combination of, I think, north of $60 million? They have got to be on the field. So Kareem Jackson played some safety in Houston last year. He could get some looks at safety, but they seem to be liking him as a corner right now. And he did play excellent as a corner for Houston last year. He was just a really good player last year. So you got versatility in him. And then Bryce Callahan has always intrigued me as someone that maybe at 5'9", with his speed, can actually play outside. And I think we will potentially see him on as an outside corner at times. It's going to be interesting to see what they do here. You certainly lack a true number 1 outside corner, depending how you consider Chris Harris. But you do got 3 guys who can play the cornerback position here. It just kind of makes you wonder on certain matchups against really good outside wide receivers, do you have a guy that can really play that well? You might be able to pull that off with Chris Harris, but it is a question mark. But then the safeties leave a lot to be desired, in my opinion. William Parks had a good season last year, 6th round pick. He's fine. He's a low-end starter. I'm not going to write home about William Parks, but he's fine. And then Justin Simmons, again, kind of a underachiever, in my opinion. He's a freak athlete. He's got size to and range, really, to play either free safety or strong safety. He'll make some flash plays, but he can be a liability at coverage quite often. Has not really met his upside. I mean, he's a 3rd round pick and, he's been a quality starter or so. But I'm just not really too excited about either of those guys as starters. And then you've got Sua Cravens. Can he stay on the field? Can he be an impact as a box safety? That big linebacker, or that big safety, small linebacker type. So much upside, just a lot of off-field questions with him. And then you're getting into the conversation about the depth here. Let's go back to corner real quick. Isaac Yiadom, 3rd round pick last year, who I liked. With these free agent signings, I don't know if he's going to get on the field a lot unless they decide to move one of these corners to more of a safety position, whether it's Callahan or Kareem Jackson. Maybe Isaac Yiadom can emerge as that outside corner like he was in college. I do like him still as a young player, but it seems he might not get on the field a lot. But the depth after Isaac Yiadom, pretty bad. Devontae Bosby, that's really it. They picked up Elijah Holder, athletic corner out of Stanford. He might be able to make this team. The depth at safety, you got Jamal Carter, Trey Marshall, Shamarko Thomas, Diamante Thomas. Gonna have some competition for that 4th and 5th roster spots at safety if they keep 5. But again, nothing too crazy at safety. It's probably what's taking this secondary rating down here into the mid-range ranking. It's not, in my opinion, what you had back in the glory days either. You don't have Aqib Talib in his prime. You don't have Darian Stewart in his prime. You don't have TJ Ward in his prime. That's the problem a lot of these defensive-minded teams have when they try to replicate what they once had, is it's really hard to replace players over the course of time as defenders regress and leave in free agency. So with all that said, Denver's defense, as we mentioned, coming in tied for 8th. I think it'll be a very good unit, but for the reasons we've mentioned at the linebacker position with the secondary, I just don't see it becoming a top 5 game-breaking defense that this team's going to need if they want to be a Super Bowl contender. It very well could be a good enough defense with a quarterback that can hopefully keep them in games that they can be a competitive team in terms of hopefully making the playoffs. As far as the defensive coaching culture is concerned, they're going to come in 13th. You do have some turnover here, some new pieces to figure all this culture out, but you got to love what Vic Fangio brings to the table. Now, they did have Vance Joseph, who was a defensive mind in here last year as the head coach, so should be a pretty smooth transition here with Vic Fangio, who runs a similar scheme. He's just a better coach. So 13th for defensive coaching culture. Overall coaching culture, they do come in 26th, mainly for a lot of unknowns. So let's go through the schedule. We've been mentioning, can this team make the playoffs? Can they not? I've got them at 8-8, which I think is very respectable. It's actually the first team we're going over here in terms of the prediction. I would say do not bet on this. If you're listening for my professional gambling opinion, the over-under is at 7. We've got a couple question marks here, so a 7 to 9 win range. So they start in Oakland. It's going to be pretty tough. I think there's a lot of hype around Oakland. We saw them come out hard last year against the Rams in Oakland, so I'll give that one to Oakland. I think they can beat Chicago. Vic Fangio is going to have a lot of familiarity with that Matt Nagy offense that, with all due respect to Chicago, is a very gimmicky offense. Vic Fangio is the most familiar with what they like to call of anyone, and is going to force Mitch Trubisky to come into Denver in their home opener against this pass rush. That is a good draw for Denver as opposed to, having to go to Chicago later in the year or something like that. So that's a good draw, but then they do have to go to Lambeau. I don't see them winning that. They have Jacksonville coming to town. I think they're going to be able to get to Nick Foles and pull that one out just with good defense at home. Then you got to go to the Chargers, give them a loss there. You get Tennessee at home, give them that win. I think they can beat Kansas City at home. We'll see what the Tyreek Hill situation is here. That's a wild card for sure. He would certainly open up their ability to come into Denver here and win that game. But that should be a really good game. Could probably put a question mark next to that one. At Indianapolis, loss. I think they can take care of Cleveland at home. This is one of those teams that at home in Denver with a good home crowd and a great defense, it's going to be a damn hard team to beat. We actually have them in these projections going 8-0 at home. It's not going to play out like that, but if you're sitting here in June trying to predict it, it's easier to say they're going to win their home games as a defensive team. At Buffalo, at Minnesota, they're not going to win those, I don't think. Really tough places to play. They got the Chargers coming to town, gave them that win. At Houston, at Kansas City, losses. And then Detroit and Oakland, lesser teams when Denver has the home field advantage, I would say. So this is going to be one of those teams that we have 8-0 at home, 8-0 on the road. It's obviously not going to play out like that, but as far as projecting things, you can probably trade a road and a home win and a loss. At the end of the day, I think this is an 8-8 or so team. Couple breaks go their way, couple teams in their division maybe get injuries at the wrong times. This team could get up to 9, maybe even 10 wins and sneak into the playoffs. Not saying it's going to happen, but I would not rule it out. So that's going to do it for the Denver Broncos. Broncos fans, please hit me up in the comments. Would love to conversate with you. If you enjoy the video, enjoy the series, again, hit that like button. Also check out my Broncos rebuild series if you have not yet. That's going to do it. Cheers as always, and we'll see you next time. Peace out.